You're listening to the best of American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
News of the day.
Mr. Zimmerman, have you made a decision as to whether or not you want to testify in this case?
With values that never die.
There are certainly a lot of controversies or scandals brewing right now when it comes to the Obama administration.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Dealing with the federal government is not always high-tech, and it's not always user-friendly.
The stories that matter.
This is a massive escalation in the tension here in Egypt.
The issues that count.
I don't know why the media tries to make this into a sensation. We have never hidden the fact that we supply Syria with weapons.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
He's got the red, white, blue flying high on the farm. Semper Fi tattooed on his left arm. Spend a little more in the store for a tag.
Welcome to American Heartland with Dr. Grace. I'm your host, the editor of Politics and Culture at worldtribune.com. Thank you so much for spending some of your afternoon with us. I am especially thrilled today. I wrote a column in World Tribune called Why Conservatives Should Take a Closer Look at Mike Huckabee. And I am honored to introduce the multi-term governor of Arkansas and former host of Huckabee, a very popular weekend political review show. Governor Huckabee, welcome to our broadcast.
Dr. Grace, it is a pleasure to be with you, and I was so very honored and thrilled by the column you wrote. I just hope that the rest of America is as smart and as insightful as you demonstrated yourself to be in that column. It was really terrific.
Thank you very much, Governor. You know what I'm hearing in the grassroots is people generally like you, they trust you, but they're saying to me, you know what, Dr. Grace, I don't think that Governor Huckabee is enough of a fighter. And right now we want a fighter, and that's why we like Cruz, and that's why we like Trump. What do you say to that, Governor Huckabee?
Well, I think people maybe don't know much about my history. When I got into politics 25 years ago, it was all a fight. I'm the only one that's fought the Clinton political machine and did it repeatedly, because every race I ever ran in Arkansas was against the machinery and apparatus that Bill and Hillary had put together in that state. It was an incredible uphill climb against the wind, because most people don't know. Arkansas was a more Democratic, partisan, hardcore blue state than Massachusetts, Vermont, Maine, Oregon, or California. It was the most lopsided in America, and I was only the fourth Republican elected in 150 years. So for people to say, well, I don't know if Huckabee can fight, then they have no idea the kind of battles I went through, not only to get elected, but then to effectively govern over the course of the 10 and a half years as governor and the course of 3 years as a lieutenant governor. It was a battle every single day I walked into that office.
Right. Now, what do you say to those who would say, well, look, if you look at the record, he's just another rhino, somebody that caved. How do you answer that?
Well, I know. Cut taxes 100 times in a state that had never seen an income tax cut. Was able to eliminate not only capital gains taxes, but the marriage penalty. We made a lot of tax cuts that benefited families, that made it easier for mothers and fathers to raise their kids. We rebuilt the road system. We made our public schools accountable and brought test scores up in every grade. We transformed the healthcare system from a intervention-based model to one that was about prevention, lowering costs for the consumer, something that I wish Obamacare had done, but it failed and went the other way. And I fought corruption. Over the course of my first few years in office, we went after the people that were stealing the taxpayers blind, and about 17 different elected officials from the state and local level were indicted, convicted, and or sentenced, saving the taxpayers billions of dollars over the course of time from the corruption that had so permeated the state of Arkansas and its one-party partisan politics.
And when people say, well, we want a fighter, and you've said, okay, I did fight them on so many issues, and I fought the Clinton political machine, what would you do if you're going up against Hillary Clinton? What are the weapons that you would use to fight her?
Well, first of all, truth is the best weapon we'll ever have. Truth is what would cause me to get on the stage with her and ask her why she looked Charles Woods, the father of Tyrone Woods, one of the four murdered in Benghazi, why she looked him in the eye in the presence of his son's casket and promised to get to the bottom of his death, and in fact never again spoke to Charles Woods. And I would ask, Mrs. Clinton, when that phone rang 4 times from your ambassador and he was begging for help, why didn't you assemble and ask the White House and the military to send every available resource to help those people survive the night? Why did we wait 7 hours and never lift a finger or move those F-16s out of Italy that could have been there in an hour and a half? I'd love to be able to ask her why, when the phone rang at 3 a.m. at her house, she let it go to voicemail. And there are many, many other questions I have for Mrs. Clinton. And again, nobody knows her quite like I do. And when I hear people say, we want a fighter, I want a fighter. I'm a fighter. But the difference is, I've often said, any drunken redneck can walk into a bar and start a fight. But what you want to know is, if you start one, can you finish it? Can you effectively lead and govern? Just to say we had a fight, and boy, it was a heck of a fight. The question is, what is the result of that fight? If it means that we improve and change and get our government operating under the Constitution, that's what we need to be fighting for, not just to go in and throw some punches and never get anything accomplished.
Right,
I've got a record of actually governing, Dr. Grace, and that's what I think people really should want in an executive.
Right. Nowadays, what you're seeing is a couple of senators who have a very thin resume, Rubio, Cruz, and Paul, in government. They have no executive experience. You have others that have no government experience whatsoever, like Trump and Carson and Fiorina. Can you explain to the folks, why does it matter? Because what I'm hearing from the grassroots is, look, maybe it's better to have somebody with no experience because the established folks, the experienced folks, are making a mess of this country. How do you answer that?
Well, I think it's a valid point that a lot of people are making. They're just so frustrated, and I can't blame them. And I don't want to say anything disparaging about any of my Republican colleagues in the race. We've got some good people that are going to be on that stage. But I believe that what I bring to the race is an extended tenure under very difficult circumstances as an executive actually governing. That's important. It's like having a pilot in the left seat of the airplane with some gray hair, 20,000 hours of flight time, who's flown through lots of thunderstorms. You want that guy in the cockpit when you're about to fly through bad weather a lot more than you want someone who just got out of flight school. The second thing, I've worked in the private sector. I've run my own businesses. I know what it's like to sign the front of the paycheck and to have to make payroll out of your own back pocket. And then I've worked in the nonprofit sector. So I understand that some things people do because they have to in the private sector. Some things they do because you've persuaded them that they want to in the nonprofit sector. And then some things in government are a combination where you can't order the legislature to do anything, but you have to learn how to lead, persuade, and get people to agree to help bring things to fruition that they may not have thought of themselves or even liked at the beginning. And that's the art of governing. And I just don't think we can have on-the-job training for the next president, somebody who has never been tested or tried in that executive role. I just think that would be a huge mistake. We've certainly seen what it is to have a untested freshman senator over the past 6.5 years. I cannot imagine why Republicans would think that'd be a good idea for us.
Right. Do you think, Governor, that Hillary Clinton should be investigated? There should a criminal investigation be launched to look into was there any wrongdoing between the work of the foundation and her role as Secretary of State? Do you think that raises flags that are so red that we should investigate from a criminal perspective?
Whether it's from a criminal perspective, that might be presumptuous, but we absolutely owe it to the taxpayers to investigate, and I believe that the former Secretary of State should absolutely cooperate with Congressman Trey Gowdy's committee. She shouldn't be able to stonewall. She should not only answer the questions. We need to know, why did you erase those 33,000 emails? Why did you have your own private server? Why did you not follow the government protocol when you knew what that protocol was? Why did you lie about the fact that you had actually multiple devices, not just one, as you claim? Why is it that you didn't fully disclose the different decisions that were being made by the State Department in regards to very specific government action that just happened to be countries where there had been very generous contributions to the Clinton Foundation. These are questions that I believe she would need to answer even if she wasn't a candidate for president. But for heaven's sakes, if she wants to lead this country, we need to know exactly her entanglements with foreign governments, her entanglements with truth, and whether or not she could be entrusted to sit in the Oval Office.
Mm-hmm. Now, Governor, right now what's on everybody's mind is the murder of Kate Steinle by an illegal immigrant who was deported several times but still is in this country. He took the life of a young woman. And the key question for the next Republican nominee is, if you become president, how are you going to secure the border, and what are you going to do with the illegals here?
Dr. Grace, I would secure the border in less than a year. And if that sounds a little audacious, let me explain. 73 years ago, we built a road between British Columbia and Alaska. Those are tough weather conditions, and we had the limitations of engineering that existed 73 years ago. That was a 1,700-mile road that was built in less than a year. I've simply refused to accept that a country that could do that 73 years ago couldn't take care of securing the border within a year under the technology that we have without the kind of bad weather conditions that would be evident in a British Columbia to Alaska road. So here's some specific things I'd do in addition to securing the border. I'd issue an executive order that ended the catch and release program that the president that we currently have has engaged in. Secondly, I would deny funding to sanctuary cities. And I would ask Congress to join me in doing the same and simply say, if you're a sanctuary city and you're not going to allow us to enforce law in your city, that we can deny you. The third thing I'd do, I'd declare that drug cartels are terrorist organizations and treat them that way. I'd reverse the executive amnesty program that is illegal, that the president himself on 23 occasions had said that he didn't have the legal authority to do, and then went ahead and did it anyway because he claimed that his pen and phone were somehow magic. And the final thing I'd do is stop immigration courts from undercutting our laws and insist that they no longer would be allowed to ignore and to selectively pick those laws with which they agreed.
And what would you do with the folks that are here?
I would be very careful not to try to address that until we secure the border. Here's how I look at it. If the pipe in my kitchen breaks and I got water spewing all over the floor, it's not my first reaction to go to Home Depot and get a new sink. It's my reaction, get the water stopped. And I think before we say, what are we going to do with the 11 million or the 20 million, however many are here, what are we going to do with them? Let's ask ourselves, are we serious about securing the border? And once we do, then the second thing I do is I'd work to pass the fair tax, because the quickest way to end illegal immigration is to take the economic advantage out of it. And the fair tax, which is a tax we pay at consumption, would do that. Because if under the current system, a person is working illegally, they're not paying payroll taxes. It's not coming out of their check. And their employer is not paying any of the payroll taxes. So there is a definite tax advantage to being illegal. But under the fair tax, when you pay at consumption, here's what happens. The illegals pay the same taxes everyone else would be paying. They would get zero benefit out of being illegal. In fact, they would be penalized because the portion of the fair tax that empowers poor people the most, which is the pre-rate that untaxes their basic necessities, only available to citizens. Therefore, if you take the advantage away and make it economically disastrous to be an illegal immigrant, then you've greatly improved the likelihood that people will not want to be illegal. They'll want to find out what does it take to be legal. And they'll do that for their own economic self-interest.
Right. Now, some members of some of your colleagues, some of your fellow contenders have denounced Donald Trump's comments regarding illegal Mexicans, saying that some illegals are murderers and rapists. He's been denounced in some quarters, and some members of the base are rallying to him. What do you think on that, Governor Huckabee? Were his words racist and offensive, or did he simply state obvious facts?
You know, I've been very careful not to comment on the other candidates, and I've been very honest in saying Donald Trump doesn't need my help in getting wind underneath his wings or to get publicity. But it's I think, very it's very just difficult for me to understand why Republicans would spend our time beating up on other Republicans. Donald Trump has as much right to run as I do or anyone else. He'll make his statements. He'll stand by his statements, and he'll defend them. I'd rather focus on my own plans, and that's what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. But I don't think Donald Trump is a racist, and I think anybody who would say that has never been around him. He's a plain-spoken guy, but I think if you disagree with somebody, calling them a racist is sort of a way to end a legitimate and thoughtful discussion, and that's unfortunate. Republicans have room in our party for Donald Trump, and we should be welcome to hear his views, and if we disagree with him, well, we'll disagree with him.
Right. Now, Governor, in the wake of the Supreme Court ruling on same-sex marriage, do you fear that there's going to be a wave of persecution coming against Christians who dissent from that? Christian organizations, for example, that say, well, we're not going to practice same-sex marriage. Do you think that we're going to be living soon in an era of Christian persecution? Will we become exiles in our own land?
We already are. And I know that may sound a little bold, but I met a couple in Iowa last week, the Oddguards, who lost their wedding chapel business because they've essentially been run out of business. They've been fined $5,000 because they refused to carry out same-sex weddings. If you talk to Melissa Klein, she and her husband Aaron have lost their cake business in Oregon. They've been fined $135,000 for discrimination because they are Christians and they do not believe that they should participate in making a cake for a same-sex couple. I've never seen a cake that was worth $135,000, but that's how much they've been fined. Well, that'll put them out of business. You see it in a florist in Washington State, Baron L. Stutzman of Arlene's Florist, a photographer in New Mexico at Elaine's Photography, a T-shirt maker in Kentucky who was told that he had to make T-shirts even though they were offensive to him. The list goes on and on. This is just the beginning. Christian schools, universities, hospitals, individual Christian-owned businesses, or for that matter, Muslim or Jewish-owned businesses, will be forced to accept a worldview that their conscience refuses them to accept, meaning they'll have to decide, will they obey God or will they obey the government? And that's a frightening place for an American to be.
Right. Now, you've called for civil disobedience. You've called the Supreme Court. It thinks it's acting like it's the supreme being, and we've got to stand up to that. Now, how far do we practice this civil disobedience?
Well, I think the next president, and I hope it's me because I'm the only one who is saying outright, I'll make it very clear that we've got to get back to the constitutional understanding of three equal branches of government. And the Supreme Court cannot make a law. They can review one, they can rule, but unless the Congress of elected representatives decides to enable that law through legislation, and unless the executive, the president, decides to sign it and enforce it, there is no law in force. And I think Americans need to go back to ninth grade civics, and we need to reflect upon the fact that if you allow the judiciary to act as if they are the supreme branch, in this case, the supreme being, what you've essentially done is surrender to judicial tyranny. Jefferson spoke out against this, as did Jackson. Abraham Lincoln ignored the court in the Dred Scott decision of 1857, just simply said, I'm not going to enforce it. And I know that may sound stunning to some people, but it really isn't at all. That's the check and balance that was created in the Constitution so that no one branch of government would be able to simply act and force the other two to surrender. And that's what a lot of people have advocated when the Supreme Court has a ruling and they say, well, that's it. That's the law of the land. There's nothing we can do. Well, of course there's something we can do. And it starts with simply making it clear that until the Congress agrees with that decision, we have no intention of following it.
Now, you have also issued out a statement, just switching gears completely, because you're going to, as you're telling us in this interview, you're going to get tough on the border, you're going to get tough on the Supreme Court, and as I understand it, you're going to get tough on ISIS too. You just issued a statement saying that President Obama is really still in denial about the threat we face from ISIS, and in fact, it was the void that he created in Iraq that led to the current crisis that we face there in the Middle East. Governor, what would you do about ISIS this? And also tell me, looking back, do you think getting into the Iraq War was a mistake altogether?
Well, the easiest thing in the world is to go back and talk about what we should have or could have done. But presidents don't get to go back in time like Marty McFly and live back to the future. We have to work with the facts we have. So there's no point in speculating. Should we have done it? I think the question is, what do we do in light of the situation we're in? And here's what we have to do. America has to have the most formidable, fierce military in the history of mankind so that when we have a threat, whether it's ISIS, Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Iranians, whatever it is, we make it very clear that we plan to push back and destroy that threat to us. And we won't take 10 years doing it. We hopefully won't even take 10 months. It'll be more like a 10-day exercise because the fierceness of our forces would mean that we can absolutely guarantee the outcome of this film. That's how America needs to operate in the world of foreign affairs and foreign policy.
Now, am I hearing boots on the ground here? Is that boots on the ground? American troops on the ground? I've been saying from the start, I'm saying almost a year now, look, we got to send the troops back in, and that's all there is to it.
We have to leave that as an option. We can't leave anything off the table. The mistake this president has made is announcing to the enemy all the things we won't do. I'd be very clear that we're going to announce to you the outcome. We win, you lose. Exactly how we do it and which levels of force we use to get it done, you'll find out when you're on the losing end of it. But we will use whatever it takes. That would include ground forces, but we would do whatever is necessary for Americans to succeed at putting down this threat and making sure that it is no longer a threat to citizens of this country.
Right. And recently, the Defense Secretary, Ash Carter, said, we've trained, check out this big number here of troops to fight in Syria, 60 instead of the 5,500 that we were promised. What is going on?
Well, this president, even when he waves the stick, he doesn't mean it, and everyone knows it. He says there's a red line. There isn't. He says we're going to arm the Kurds. We didn't. He says we're going to train the people who will defend Iraq. We don't. Nobody trusts him. Nobody. Why would they? He's never kept his word, never stood behind one of his threats, and he's put more pressure on Israel to stop building bedrooms for their families in their own neighborhoods than he has on Iran to stop building a nuclear bomb that would blow up half the Middle East and ultimately America. And this is why we need firm, clear, decisive leadership in the White House, and I'm hoping that we'll have it come January of 2017.
Indeed. Now, Governor, one final question. I know you've been so generous with your time. We're a little bit over the time that you had allotted for me, but I'm enjoying the interview. I don't know about you. I can just keep going all day. I have one final question for you, sir. Some folks say, okay, look, Huckabee is charming, he's engaging, he speaks well, and I'm on his wavelength on so many issues. But, on a couple of issues, he flip-flopped. Governor, did you flip-flop on Common Core and on Social Security?
Neither one. On Common Core, what happened was Common Core changed. It originally was a state-controlled standards for two things, and it was standards only, not curriculum. It was for math and language arts, and it was to be controlled by the state so the federal government wouldn't co-opt education policy. Well, the exact opposite happened. The federal government got its fingers all over it, tied it to things like data collection, additional subjects, curriculum, and they totally destroyed what would have been something the states would have had control over. So now I oppose it because it isn't what it was originally sold and intended to be. And Social Security, somebody said, well, I once said that we need to thank Paul Ryan for putting a plan out there, but a plan that I don't necessarily support. Look, what I said was I appreciate someone addressing the problems that clearly exist with the Social Security system that's underfunded. I didn't endorse the specifics of his plan. What I have said very clearly is the government has already lied to us and stolen from us. And the last thing we need to do is to tell people, oh, yeah, you've worked 51 years into a system, you've had your paychecks involuntarily raided by the government for Social Security and Medicare, and now that you've put that money in good faith, involuntarily, the government is going to say, we didn't really mean it. We're going to raise the age at which those benefits start to 75. We're going to take that money away from you because we're now going to means test, and you make too much money. That wasn't the deal people signed up for. And if Congress is intent on ending someone's pension, let it be their own, not some 80-year-old widow who faithfully paid in throughout her working years and was promised that if she did that, that Social Security check would be there waiting on her. I think, Dr. Grace, the last thing Republicans need to be is guilty of pulling the rug out from under working people who in good faith believe that the government would honor their commitments.
Then how would you balance the books if you're not willing to touch such a big entitlement program?
There are two ways. One, grow the economy, because you're never going to get out of the debt we're in unless we significantly and rapidly grow the economy. That's why I support the fair tax, because nothing gooses the economy as abruptly and as dramatically as moving from a tax on our productivity to simply taxing consumption. And one of the reasons the fair tax really does make a difference is because under the current tax system, the only people paying into Social Security and Medicare are the people who work for wages. Well, we know that over the past several years, fewer people get their wealth out of wages. Most of the wealth in this country comes from dividends and from capital gains, from which there is no Social Security or Medicare taxes received. Under the fair tax, all the money that's paid at the point of consumption goes into the general fund. So for the first time, you have a reliable funding stream for these programs in a vastly enhanced economic climate. So it's not going to be something done overnight or in a year or two, but there is a way to grow our way out of the economic mess we're in and get to the place where we're actually able to begin to pay down the debt and to stabilize these programs.
Mm-hmm. Well, Governor, you've been very generous with your time, and I really appreciate it. I was impressed in your speech and when you launched your presidential campaign that you put our veterans first. I used to run a section of the Washington Times which was devoted to the military community. And in this show, unfortunately, we haven't discussed issues regarding veterans, but I hope that in the future you and I can devote perhaps 15 minutes just to discussing all the ills that plague our veterans. You think that that'll be possible, Governor Huckabee?
I would love to do it because I do think it's one of the most underappreciated segments of our entire country. And if anyone deserves the first fruits of our treasury, it's our veterans. So I look forward to coming back and visiting with you about that.
Thank you very much for your time, Governor Huckabee. I want everybody to go to my article, Why Conservatives Should Take a Closer Look at Mike Huckabee. There's so much to discuss. A lot of the issues are also there in the piece. And Governor, it's been such a pleasure. This is Dr. Grace, upholding values that are never, ever going to die.
I can count on to keep me going strong. Yeah, I hold on.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
You're listening to the best of American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Shut up, just shut up, shut up, shut up, just shut up, shut up, shut up, just shut up, shut up, shut it up, just shut up, shut up, shut 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 it up, just shut up.
Well, it's time for that part of the show where we look around the country and say to those who truly deserve it, just shut up. This week in the news, Bill Cosby, the comedian, the outspoken moralist, the public moralist, as so many people call him in the press right now, formerly a public moralist, now that all of the revelations against him are coming forward and they are truly damaging. We now know beyond the shadow of a doubt, Bill Cosby admitted under oath to getting drugs to give to women that he wanted to have sex with. There have been about 24 women who came forward saying that they were drugged and they then woke up not being able to remember what exactly had happened the night before. Now, when this story first emerged, I didn't care that Bill Cosby has spoken very eloquently on a number of times on key issues of social values. I looked at the facts. And when you have that many women saying that this had been done to them, it was very clear that the guy is guilty as sin. And now the truth is out. And we also knew that that was the case because Cosby himself didn't really mount much of a defense. Listen to how he responded when he was asked about this when it first broke. Roll it, Brittany.
I just wanted to ask if you wanted to respond at all about whether any of that was true.
There's no response.
Okay. Can I ask you, if with the persona that people know about Bill Cosby, should they believe anything differently about what...
There is no comment about that.
Why wouldn't there be a comment about that? That speaks volumes. If somebody accused me of doing something like that, I wouldn't just make a comment. I would be shouting from the rooftops about my innocence. What I find particularly surprising is that there are folks out there with ideological blinders. Just because Bill Cosby did a number of good things, for example, The Cosby Show showed African Americans in a really positive light. Yes. And that empowered many African Americans to envision for themselves that they could be part, say, of the upper class, upper middle class, like the Huxtabies were. Great and good. Just because in conservative circles, Bill Cosby spoke out on issues like effective parenting. Some of these people, because they liked aspects of what Cosby did in various parts of his professional life or his public speeches, they didn't want to see the evidence. Putting on ideological blinders. Because he's done some things right, because he's been good in some respects, I don't want to hear or see anything else about him. And they actually browbeat it. I mean, we as radio hosts, we know, we get this in our emails or on people that call into radio shows. This is some kind of a giant witch hunt against Bill Cosby. Don't talk about it. Don't feed into it. Don't go there. And I refuse to bow to that. It was clear to me that many women who come forward and say that can't be lying. How would you possibly pull that off without one of them saying, you know what? We're part of this giant conspiracy. I mean, how could you pull that off without one of them breaking ranks? It defies common sense. And I think one thing we know, after years of discussing issues regarding women being raped or sexually harassed, it does occasionally happen that men are falsely accused of this. No doubt about it. But in the majority of cases, it is so humiliating. It is so embarrassing. It is so devastating to endure something like this. To have your body violated. It is so degrading that women generally don't talk about it. And so when they come forward, because it's so humiliating, we've got to look at that very, very carefully and very seriously, especially when it's about a very powerful man. Especially because it is usually powerful men who can keep it hidden for years. And so to all those out there that emailed radio shows and radio hosts like myself and called in and said, don't cover this story, don't cover the Bill Cosby thing, I say, shut up. Because you stood in the way of justice for these women. But you know what? The truth has come out and justice is being served. Bill Cosby is now being forced to settle lawsuits. And these women are now, instead of being vilified, they are being patted on the back. They are heroes for saying their tale, no matter how degrading, no matter how humiliating. And what we can see from all of this is that the truth eventually comes out. Powerful men eventually pay for their crimes. And I am delighted that those women didn't back down and finally received justice. And you know how on this show I love to find the good news in the week. And that brings us to our grab bag segment. Well, the people have tremendous power. And regardless of the fact that members of the GOP establishment, like Marco Rubio, like Jeb Bush, they were saying, oh, let's distance ourselves from Donald Trump's comments. Let's try to shut him down. Now the tide is turning. And we are seeing folks coming forward and saying, give this man a chance to say whatever is on his mind without calling him nasty names. After all, isn't this the United States of America where we have free speech and we should be mature enough to have a debate on anything and everything? That's what defines the United States of America. Free speech. And what we see happening nowadays is instead of being able to say whatever we want to say, you have these periodic bursts of outrage. Don't say this and don't say that. Don't attack Bill Cosby. We like him too much. Shut up, Donald Trump, because he is offending all Mexicans. This is the United States of America. We have free speech here. And we have to defend free speech, not against any necessarily a legal crusade against it, but a public crusade against free speech, where you have folks wanting to bully and browbeat others into thinking the same way and speaking the same way. Well, regarding Donald Trump, guess who's rallying to his defense now? Not only Governor Mike Huckabee, who said, listen, on this broadcast, as you heard at the top of this hour, we had the interview, Donald Trump has the right to say whatever he wants to say. And if he thinks that there's a preponderance of illegals that are coming into this country who are murderers and rapists, he has the right to say that without us calling him a racist, without saying he doesn't belong on the GOP stage in a debate, without saying he doesn't belong in the GOP field, he doesn't belong in the GOP party. Let him say what he wants to say. And it's not just Governor Mike Huckabee who had the courage to defend free speech, but also Bill Kristol. He was with Steve Malzberg on Newsmax earlier this week. He was there to discuss Trump's influence on the Republican presidential field. And he said, listen, I'm not a Trump fan. And nor do I think he should be the Republican nominee. But it's foolish, he said, his words, ridiculous and foolish, said Bill Kristol, if the Republican establishment and Republican candidates treat him with disdain. Instead, they should be saying, you know what, it's good to have a lot of voices. It's good to have some unconventional voices in the race. That's me paraphrasing Bill Kristol. In other words, as the headline in the Weekly Standard with that story is, don't dump on the Donald. There's no need to do that. we are mature enough in this country, whether it be in our private lives, in marriages, for example, or discussing things with our children, or even in the professional workplace, we can sit down and say, I don't agree with what you just said, but it doesn't make you a racist. It doesn't make you evil. It doesn't make you a bigot. It just means we disagree. And we're seeing this pattern of browbeating and bullying on all fronts. You know, there was a story in CNSnews.com about an actor who refuses to call Caitlyn Jenner Caitlyn. He says, you know what, that's Bruce Jenner because I find it offensive what he did to his body, and I don't recognize his transformation as valid. He is being squarely denounced. And I stand with him. I agree, as I did several monologues on our broadcast about Bruce Jenner. That's not Bruce Jenner. That's still Caitlyn Jenner, if you ask me. Forgive me, the other way around. Gee, they're getting to me too. That's not Caitlyn Jenner. That's Bruce Jenner. Born Bruce Jenner and will always be Bruce Jenner. And you know what? My saying that doesn't make me a bigot. It doesn't make me a hater. It makes me a person with a different point of view. I'm willing to respect your point of view without vilifying you. Are you willing to do the same for me, for the Donald, for Governor Huckabee, for Marco Rubio, or for whoever else it is that is being told that they can't say what they really think and what they really feel? If we continue to go down this road, we're going to create a very stale, boring society. That's really the road that we're going down. Political correctness is the path of intellectual suicide. And in this country, we really need to take a strong stand against it. People can disagree, and that doesn't mean that there's something fundamentally wrong with them. Well, it's been an exciting week in the news. A lot has taken place, but I want to refer everyone back to the article that I wrote on worldtribune.com. Why conservatives should take a really, really good look at Governor Mike Huckabee. As I say in my piece, Governor Huckabee is a vetted candidate. He is an individual who has stood the test of time, and he has upheld Christian values and Christian morality like no other candidate in the entire Republican field. This is a man who has executive leadership experience, and I don't think we can simply dismiss that. The governor has strong opinions on issues like same-sex marriage, and I applaud him for being a fighter on social issues. We began this broadcast by asking the question. I asked him, are you a fighter, sir? I can't think of anybody in the United States of America who has fought harder, without apology, for Christians and our traditional values. If that's not a fighter against this stifling political correctness, I don't know what a fighter is. I don't know what a fighter looks like. Governor Huckabee, once again, thank you for being on our broadcast, and thank you for helping me to uphold values that will never die.
Ain't out of reach. Hard work pays off the way it should.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
You're listening to the best of American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Wave after wave, wave after wave. Slowly
Welcome back to American Heartland with Dr. Grace. I am the editor of Politics and Culture at worldtribune.com. Well, last week, the Donald made waves. On Saturday at a massive rally in Phoenix, he was the talk of the town. Initially, they were going to hold the event at the Biltmore Hotel, a swanky place. And then due to overwhelming demand, they had to bring it to a much larger venue. Today, we have somebody who was there and is reporting to us about what happened. She is the senior news writer at the Alliance Defending Freedom. She also used to work at the Washington Times. Her resume is extremely long. That's a small snapshot of it. Former editorial writer and now the senior news writer at Alliance Defending Freedom, and somebody who lives in the Phoenix area, and also my brilliant younger sister. Loredana, welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be with you.
Well, Lori, you got a piece in World Tribune. It's titled, "We're Getting Ripped," Trump says in Phoenix, and voices in the crowd say he is not a racist. You attended the rally. You are an eyewitness as to exactly what happened on Saturday afternoon. Can you describe the scene from the very beginning?
Yes, it was an absolutely incredible event. When I got to the Phoenix Convention Center, I actually got there. The event was supposed to start at 2 p.m., and I got there half an hour early thinking, I've got plenty of time. And when I got there, just to find parking garages were max to capacity. And I saw thousands of people. Just the streets were crowded, and it was just difficult just to find parking. And as I said, so many garages were full. And then finally, once I did that and I actually got to the Phoenix Convention Center, the lines were basically snaking around blocks to get in. And in the sweltering heat of over 100 degrees, people stood in line for an hour and 45 minutes just to get in. It was just insane.
Wow. What was the atmosphere like as they were standing in line? Were they being patient, or were they getting aggravated that it was so difficult to get in?
No, actually, that surprised me because most people usually do get upset about things like that. They were very patient and calm, and they were just all really excited and eager to meet Donald Trump and hear him and hear what he had to say. Of course, there were a lot of protesters, people holding signs, Trump is a racist, Trump equals hate, Trump is delusional. But that didn't sway the people in line. And I actually got to speak to a number of them because I wanted to get their take on what is it about Donald that, that makes them want to stand in line, and why do they want to hear him? And given his controversial statements recently about how illegal immigrants many of them are drug dealers and criminals and rapists, he's received a lot of backlash. But when I actually was talking to people who were waiting, they said, no, Trump is not a racist, and they believe he actually likes Mexican people and that he employs thousands of them for his company and all of his different business ventures, and that he pays them well and he treats them well. I met another woman who said that she actually has Latino friends from Central America and Mexico, that they are for Trump. And many others that were just simply saying that they actually believe that people should be entering this country legally.
So the ones that you spoke to that were from Central America, they were legal Hispanic immigrants.
No, I was saying that I had one woman said she had a friend who she has friends from Central America and from Mexico.
Oh,
I see. For Trump.
Who are for Trump. Okay, I see what you're saying. So I know that we're hearing that as well, that especially amongst the legal Hispanics, I think they're being painted with a broad brush in the media as though they don't, all they care about is their relatives that might be illegal. That's not true. There are many legal Hispanics who are just as concerned about the border crisis as everybody else is.
And that's what one resident from Sun City told me. He's a retired gentleman, and he was saying that he says that the Mexican people themselves who are legal here, they don't want criminals in the U.S. They don't want other illegals here. They want it to be safe. They think it's just as important as Americans to, secure the border.
Right. And, this charge against Trump that what he said was racist and offensive. But if you think about it, if we are not vigilant about who comes into our country, then that criminal element poses a danger even to Hispanics themselves. I mean, that's just common sense because they're more likely to be integrated in their communities. So if you really care for Hispanics, the legal Hispanics in this country, the argument to be made is you want to make sure that they're safe. And so we're, again, on the side of true compassion and not false compassion.
Yes, absolutely. And then once we actually got into the convention center, only about 5,000 people actually got in. And according to Trump's spokesperson, they actually distributed 15,000 tickets for the event. And so even though I was standing at the back of the ballroom at the Phoenix Convention Center, I could still see hundreds of people lined outside, still snaking around blocks, just trying to get in or trying to see him. But when we were actually at the event, there was a lot of energy, a lot of great music talking about getting America back, and that's what Trump's slogan is, make America great again. But it was very touching because during his speech, Trump introduced Jamie Shaw Sr., and he's the father of a high school student, a rising football star, who was actually gunned down in the street in Los Angeles in 2008 by a Mexican illegal immigrant. And it was a gang member who actually thought that this 17-year-old boy, he mistook him for another rival gang member and killed him. He shot him in the stomach, and then he shot him in the head.
Another heartbreaking story.
Very heartbreaking. He was found guilty in 2012 and sentenced to death, but that still doesn't make up for the loss of this poor young boy.
And there are hundreds across the country with similar sad stories. Now, Laurie, tell me something. You said that there were protesters outside the venue as well. What were they saying? What were these protesters saying?
Basically, they were saying Trump is full of hate. Trump is a racist. Trump is delusional. Trump is a joke. He doesn't have a shot at becoming president. Get off our lawn. Get out of Arizona. We don't want you here.
And what was the interaction between the that's what I was going to ask. Was the interaction between the protesters outside and the people in line who were obviously supporting Trump?
Many of the people in line ignored the protesters. There were a couple that answered them back, and there were a couple of exchanges. But I would say for the most part, people just ignored them and went about just continuing to hold their posters and wear their buttons and support Trump, because many of them had Trump for president banners and posters and buttons.
Right. Now, let me ask you this. Did you get a chance to observe what was the ethnic composition of the protesters? Were there any Hispanics amongst them, or were they just white people for the most part?
Most of them were, I would say, white people, which is actually ironic.
Which is ironic, because if he so offended Hispanics, you would think that the Hispanics would be rallying outside.
No, it was definitely white people. The majority were white people.
Right. Now, Laurie, describe the scene inside when Donald Trump was speaking. How did the crowd react to him, and what were the lines that garnered the greatest applause?
Well, from the get-go, he was. They just greeted him with thunderous applause. So he has a very great conversational style and makes people feel at ease. But he was, as from the minute he stepped out, he basically said that we have to stop illegal immigration, and people just went crazy. He would say we have to secure our borders, and they went crazy. Those were some of the key lines. But then he was talking about how we just have to make America great, how he has the experience running. He is a multi-billionaire, and that he can make America great again. He can help with jobs. He can also, he got a lot of applause when he talked about how he can really get ISIS on the run. That garnered a lot of cheers.
I think the public perception among his supporters is that if he's so successful in his private life, he's a winner. So he's going to win for America. That's, I think, the appeal of Donald Trump. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. And he actually really told a funny kind of anecdote. And he said, I'm a doer and I get things done. He said, when the media asked Jeb Bush what he thought about Iraq and if it was the right decision to invade, for America to invade, it took him 5 days to come up with a comprehensive answer. And so everybody was booing and cheering, saying, yeah, that's ridiculous. And then Trump said, I'm a businessman, I'm a doer. It wouldn't take me. I would have answered the media immediately. I don't need 5 days to make a decision about what to do about anything.
And now you have members of the media say, like Jeb Bush, and he's been saying, we need to present a very sunny face to the public. We don't want to be the party of grievance, and we don't want to be a party that insults others. But how did the crowd react when he insulted, say, somebody like Jeb Bush or the media or anybody else? I mean, he throws insults left, right, and center. How is the crowd responding to that?
They were cheering. It was actually the only time they booed was any time that he mentioned Jeb Bush or Hillary Clinton or the liberal media. That's when they started booing. For the most part, they were cheering everything that he said. So they actually really like his can-do attitude and his the fact that he's anti-establishment, the fact that he calls a spade a spade. That's what really makes him so appealing.
Right.
And the fact that, he doesn't have any ties to anything, any political ties, so he's not afraid to call out things as he sees them.
Right. And Lori, my final question, you've given us a really excellent eye window account into the rally. I feel like I was there just by everything you've described. This is the question I'm wondering. Now, Donald Trump has definitely tapped into a chord in American society, this anger at the crisis that we have on our border and the influx of illegals. Is he just a one-issue candidate, or is there more to him?
Well, from the people in the crowd and the way that I was asking them if they thought he had a shot to win, they seem to think that, yes, he's more than just this one-trick pony on immigration. And as he outlined in his speech, he was going to do more than just secure the borders. He was going to create jobs, and he was going to improve our relations internationally, and he was going to fight the war on terror. So he definitely presented himself as a multifaceted candidate that has the gumption to go the distance. And I think that's what people really saw. And as I said, I asked people directly, do you think he can win the GOP nominee and then eventually win the general election? And all of them that I asked said yes.
Okay. Fascinating report, Laurie. Thank you for being our window into that really spectacular rally. You can read her piece at worldtribune.com. It's called We're Getting Ripped, Trump Says in Phoenix. Voices in the crowd say he is not a racist. It is full of individuals that Loredana interviewed. She got them on the record to say what they thought of Trump. And I think why this piece is so important is that it really goes contrary to the narrative that's been presented in our media, that so many people are offended by what he's saying. You interviewed so many people in your piece that are saying, no, not only are we not offended, but he is articulating what we are saying, what we think, what we feel. Thank you, Loredana, for being with us. She is the senior news writer at the Alliance Defending Freedom, a former editorial writer at the Washington Times, a very talented woman. Thanks for being with us, Laurie.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And there you have it. Somebody who did some reporting right there on the ground, interviewing the crowd, giving us a snapshot into exactly what happened. This is Dr. Grace. I am the editor of Politics and Culture at worldtribune.com, upholding values that will not die.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.